This is Kim Newlove, host of the Pharmacist Voice podcast, where I share my journey from pharmacist to voice actor and interview a variety of people who use their voices to advocate for something, educate in some way, or entertain, so that you can be inspired to use your voice too. This is episode 110, and you can find the show notes with links to anything mentioned in today's episode on my website, thepharmacistvoice.com. It's the middle of August 2021. I just returned from vacation August 8th, and it took a good week to catch up. My kids are finally back to school as of August 19th, and it was hectic to both recover from vacation and get ready for school at the same time. We had a pile of mail to go through, bills to pay, school supplies to shop for, groceries to restock, 2 teenage boys to keep out of trouble, and so on. I'm sure you can imagine. It's been a busy month. Let's dive right into today's episode, which is entitled 10 Best Practices for Podcast Guests. Being a podcast guest can be intimidating, especially if it's your first time. Let's face it, if you're a pharmacist, podcasting was not part of our formal education. The problem with anything new, especially podcasting, is that when we don't know what we don't know, it's hard to know the right things to do. In this case, it's hard to sound your best when you don't know what needs to be done. I'd like to help you out. Please note, this episode is not about what to say. Instead, it's about how to get the best sounding audio possible so that listeners can focus on what you have to say. How did I come up with the best practices in this episode? Well, I learned them all from having a podcast, which I started in December 2019 during my career change from pharmacist to voice actor. As you can imagine, I talk to my own podcast guests about best practices before I record an interview. I have learned from my experiences with my own podcast guests, as well as from my podcasting coach, Dave Jackson from the School of Podcasting, and from my audio engineering coaches. I hope this episode helps you, too. Without further ado, here are 10 best practices for podcast guests. Number 1. Use the best microphone you have available. If possible, avoid using your computer's built-in microphone. I've found that using earbuds with a built-in microphone sounds better than using the microphone built into a computer. Number 2. Know how to use your microphone or headset and make sure you tell your computer which microphone to use. If you have an Audio-Technica 2100X USB microphone, for example, make sure you select that as your audio input. If you're on a Mac, once your microphone is plugged in, go to System Preferences, then Sound, then Input, and select your microphone. If you have a PC, I'm sure there's a similar path to accessing the sound options on your machine. Once you've selected your microphone, tap it gently before the host starts recording. Can the host hear you? Make sure that they can hear you before they record an entire interview. If you absolutely have to use the microphone built into your computer, at least keep the microphone clear of obstructions. What I mean is, don't set anything on top of that part of the computer. The audio will sound muffled, and nothing can fix it. For example, if you have notes on a piece of paper and you set that piece of paper over your microphone, that's no good. Don't do that. On a similar note, if you're wearing a vest or a piece of clothing that obstructs your microphone, or your microphone keeps rubbing against the vest, take the vest off. Hopefully, your host will point this out to you. Also, know where to place your microphone. I generally put my podcasting microphone at the level of my mouth, but it's aimed at the corner of my mouth, and my mouth is at least a fist's distance from the microphone. That's between 3 and 6 inches as a general rule. If you put your microphone directly in front of your mouth, you run the risk of popping your P's and your B's. If you don't know what that sounds like, I'll just say that the microphone will collect the air from your P or your B and make a distracting puh, puh, popping noise. Here's another note about placing your microphone. If you absolutely have to use your built-in computer microphone, at least get your face as close to the computer as you can. That means don't lean back in your chair. The farther you are from your microphone, the harder it is for people to hear. Be nice and close to the mic. Again, don't lean back in your chair. Scoot up to the table, okay? And if you're using a laptop, maybe consider putting your laptop on top of a crate or on top of a pile of books. No matter which microphone you use, practice using it before your podcast interview. You can record yourself on Zoom or use another app of your choosing to practice. Whatever you do, find where your microphone sounds best and use that technique during your interview. Number 3, wear earbuds or headphones. Why is this important? Because if you don't wear them, there might be an echo in the recording. Echoes are bad. Has this happened to me? You bet. I have recorded the echo of my own voice coming through my podcast guest's computer on more than one occasion. It takes a little audio engineering magic to cancel it out, but what's unfortunate is that I can't hear that it's happening while it's happening. When I listen to the playback, though, it's there. Just wear earbuds or headphones and you'll be fine. Number 4, hardwire in. Wireless connections can fail or not work properly at times. Use an Ethernet cable and connect your computer to your internet source. For example, this is what I do. I have an Apple Airport Extreme router and I plug my iMac into it. What does that look like? Well, I run a 50-foot Ethernet cable between my office and the router. I'm on the second floor, the router's on the first floor. It's not pretty, but it works great. Number 5, use good computer hygiene. What does that mean? Close any applications on your computer that you aren't using, reboot your computer, and ask your family to refrain from using anything that uses a lot of bandwidth, like Netflix, during the interview, unless you have plenty of bandwidth. To give you an idea of what I do, the only thing that I have open during a podcast interview is my recording software, which is either SquadCast or Zoom. Number 6, record in a quiet room, preferably a carpeted room with sound-absorbing material in it. Let's go over a worst-case scenario and a best-case scenario. Recording in a kitchen with a tile floor and a high ceiling is one of the worst places to record. Why? Sound reflection. What is sound reflection? It's like an echo in a room. Think high school gymnasium. Sound reflects off of hard, flat surfaces. And what's in a kitchen? A bunch of hard, flat surfaces. Let's say you're speaking in the direction of your refrigerator. Your sound bounces off the fridge and goes to the walls, other appliances, windows, cabinets, countertops, floor, and ceiling. Depending on your setup, it might sound like you recorded your side of the interview in a high school gymnasium. When listeners can focus on what you're saying instead of where you're saying it, you're doing it right. Recording in a sound booth or a carpeted walk-in closet with lots of clothing inside is ideal. Best case scenario. A carpeted room with furniture and no windows is a great choice too. Let's move on. Number 7, reduce distractions. There's a lot of nuggets of wisdom here. I'll go through them pretty quick. Definitely keep your kids and pets out of the room during an interview. Try to pick a time when no one is using loud machines outside, like a lawnmower, a weed trimmer, a tree chipper, a leaf blower, or a snow blower. Turn off your cell phone ringer. Hearing your notifications during a podcast interview will distract listeners. Also, do not use your keyboard or mouse during an interview. Those clicks and taps get recorded too. Don't click a pen, bump your desk, or move papers around either. All that gets into audio. And one last thing, don't wear jewelry during your podcast interview. The sound of jewelry clinking around your neck or your ears will get recorded, and it will distract the listener. Number 8, make sure your device has enough battery. If you're recording a podcast interview on a laptop, make sure your laptop's charged. I used to record podcast interviews on my laptop. I would either plug it into a wall charger or charge the laptop completely before the interview and pray that the battery would last. I switched to recording podcast interviews on my iMac because the sound of the battery fan bothered me, and I also like the size of the iMac screen better than I like the small size of a laptop screen. Personal preference. Number 9, relax. Podcast recordings are not typically live. Mine aren't. That means that the recordings can be edited. I have had more than one guest ask to try something a second time. We all make mistakes. We're human. If it happens to you, just tell the host you want to try something again. It should be no problem. I personally usually allow 5 seconds of silence before the second attempt so that the edit point is obvious to me later when I edit the recording. And finally, number 10, have a glass of water within reach. The problem is that when we talk, we get thirsty. If you need a drink, take a break from talking, drink some water, then dive right back into the interview. I can edit out water breaks, but I can't fix how you sound if you're constantly clearing your throat or coughing because you need a drink. Well, that's the list of 10 best practices for podcast guests. Let's wrap this up. Poor audio quality turns listeners off, and when noises are recorded along with any voice, they're distracting. I want to make you sound good so that if you're ever a guest on my podcast or someone else's, listeners will be able to focus on what you're saying instead of the cat in the room, the notifications on your phone, the necklace rattling around your neck, your neighbor's lawnmower, or the lag in your audio because your Wi-Fi is unstable. Use the 10 best practices for podcast guests mentioned in this episode, and it will make a big difference in the listener experience. Go forth and do good things. Thank you for listening to episode 110 of the Pharmacist Voice podcast. Please visit thepharmacistvoice.com to read the show notes. You'll find links to Dave Jackson and the School of Podcasting, SquadCast, and more in the show notes. Please subscribe or follow the Pharmacist Voice podcast for all future episodes so that they're delivered to your favorite podcast player the day they come out. If you liked this episode, share it with a friend. In fact, if you share a screenshot of this episode on Instagram, tag me so I can thank you personally. My Instagram handle is KimNulaVO. Thanks again for listening.